This column of Russian equipment decided to test their luck, but was immediately met with a powerful response. They came under heavy fire from Ukrainian artillery and quickly began losing their vehicles one by one. The situation became even more dire when soldiers armed with javelins, who had been waiting in ambush for the right moment, joined the artillery in the attack. They disabled an enemy APC and, with a few precise strikes, effectively paralyzed the column's movement, creating a traffic jam at the intersection. The Russians panicked and attempted to scatter, fleeing in different directions. But it's not so easy to escape when you're being attacked from all sides. Most likely, this was the Ukrainians' plan, to lure the Russian vehicles into a convenient position and then spring the trap shut. In just a few minutes, at a small corner of the battlefield, at least 3 APCs and 1 tank were destroyed. However, another group of Russian vehicles managed to push a bit further, though not without damage. We can see that the tank leading the column is still moving but is on fire. The Ukrainians attempt to finish it off, but instead hit its companion vehicle, which isn't a bad outcome either. After some time, the Russians realize they can't save the tank and abandon it in the middle of the road. The retreating tank, having moved just a few meters away, takes a couple more precise hits. But its companion didn't manage to escape far either. The crew abandoned the burning tank just minutes after it was struck by a kamikaze drone. Despite the fact that the tank is now fully engulfed in flames, it deserves some respect. Its armor managed to withstand several javelin hits and a direct strike from an FPV drone. After all this damage, if the Russians had managed to extinguish the fire in time, they might have even been able to repair the tank, but certainly not in the middle of a battlefield. So this time, the outcome is both obvious and spectacular. As for the roads where the Russians were trapped, explosions continued to echo, destroying both old and new equipment. One of the Russian APCs stopped nearby, possibly to evacuate survivors, but that proved to be a mistake. Those who somehow managed to survive will most likely remember this crossroads as a cursed place. The Russian army miscalculated the timing and location of their offensive, and paid the price with dozens of destroyed military vehicles and an even greater number of soldiers lost. These APCs and tanks are now left to slowly burn out in the Ukrainian fields. This tank tried to escape, and it almost succeeded. However, in its rush to leave the battlefield, it failed to notice a crater ahead and got stuck. Most likely, the tank crew simply didn't notice the crater and continued driving along the road. Alternatively, the Russians might have been confident that the tank could easily overcome such an obstacle. A stationary tank on the battlefield is an extremely tempting prize, one that a hunter will quickly find. A drone armed with an incendiary charge lands behind the turret, almost instantly setting the tank on fire. If just a minute ago the tank could have been salvaged, now it's beyond saving. A few days later, the Russians tried to storm these same positions again, but from a slightly different direction. Do they really not learn from their mistakes? Or perhaps following orders from their command is more important than surviving? Whatever the reasons behind this renewed offensive, it was carried out with fewer forces and ended the same way as the previous one. These events are taking place in the Kursk region of the Russian Federation, so it's no surprise that the Russians are using all available methods to try to push the Ukrainians out of these positions, combining armored offensives with numerous infantry assaults, including the involvement of North Korean soldiers. This time, the enemy split into several small groups to make it harder to target them with artillery. As a result, the Ukrainians had to rely primarily on FPV drones for effective hunting of these moving targets. Only after losing dozens of armored vehicles again did the Russians slightly slow down their attempts to seize this position. However, this is likely temporary, and in a short time, we may once again witness new equipment burning on this section of the front line. Surviving Russian soldiers often hesitate to return home, as they likely face punishment for desertion. Under the cover of fog, Russian forces managed to infiltrate buildings and establish defensive positions. Using artillery was too risky, so initially, the occupiers were targeted with FPV drones. However, due to dense construction and weather conditions, this approach didn't yield the desired results. That's when Ukrainian warriors decided to unleash the beast. Tank crews from the 28th Brigade arrived to assist. Taking advantage of the fog, the soldiers managed to drive right up to the buildings occupied by the enemy and began shelling the positions where the Russians were hiding. The Ukrainian tank systematically destroyed enemy shelters with precision, while the FPV drone operator team assisted in eliminating the enemy in harder-to-reach positions. While this tank attacked from one side, another joined the battle from the opposite edge of the settlement. It also began targeting the fortifications where Russian soldiers were hiding, effectively cutting off their escape routes and trapping them in a situation from which they were unlikely to escape. The first tank took up a position on the road leading into the village, making it impossible for the enemy to bypass it. Meanwhile, its counterpart focused its attention on a group of enemy infantry that had taken cover near the ruins of an abandoned power station. Despite the smoke spreading after the explosions, which makes it difficult to see and count Russian losses, but we can confidently say that in a situation where you are surrounded by 2 tanks and dozens of drones, the chances of survival are practically zero. At the start of this winter assault, the Russians still had hopes that it could be successful. But just a few minutes into the attack, doubts began to arise about the future success of their offensive. The first to engage in the fight was the Ukrainian artillery, which caused the Russians considerable trouble. Of course, hitting a moving target with artillery shells is not easy, but when it does happen, even the most well-armored vehicles stand little chance of survival. Despite the fact that artillery's accuracy is not very high, it remains one of the primary weapons in the fight against enemy equipment. Using artillery, a significant number of tanks and armored vehicles are destroyed, although not many of these incidents are captured on video. Later, of course, various drone pilots join the battle, targeting the surviving vehicles and ensuring the complete destruction of these uninvited guests. In modern warfare, all means of destruction must work in harmony, like an orchestra, to counter the enemy's army as effectively as possible, especially when that army outnumbers you several times over. Ukrainians also have to showcase maximum skill in conditions of limited weaponry. For instance, in this case, we can see an FPV drone operator perform an incredible aerial loop to strike their target right near the turret. The better the first hit, the fewer additional drones will be needed to neutralize the target. The second and third drones also hit the tank, forcing it to stop. However, even after such a series of explosions, the target remains not fully destroyed. The tank's armor and additional anti-drone shield significantly increase its protection. In this case, it took considerable effort from the Ukrainians to neutralize it. In the end, the tank is finally destroyed. However, there are moments when luck and skill align perfectly, and we witness a one-shot, one-hit scenario. Give a thumbs up to the courage and skill of the Ukrainian soldiers, and we'll show you even more videos that prove it. In this video, we can observe a rapid change of plans by one of the Russian armored vehicles. It survived the first strike from a Ukrainian drone and even kept moving as if nothing had happened. However, after just a few meters, the driver had a change of heart and quickly began retreating in the direction they originally came from. The second drone missed slightly, but the third and fourth hit their target precisely. Another explosion occurred nearby, and it was only the fifth drone that finally managed to take out this APC. This beast proved to be incredibly tough this time, but not immortal. This tank was quite well camouflaged with branches. However, Ukrainian drone operators are not so easily fooled. Camouflage is, of course, useful, but in such cases the tank becomes a stationary target, making it much easier to destroy. Initially, the first wave of kamikaze drones is sent for reconnaissance by fire to completely disable the identified tank. And only after that, it can be effectively finished off by dropping explosives from regular drones, saving the single-use FPV drones. This tank met the same fate as the previous one. However, this time the kamikaze drone struck a vulnerable spot and destroyed its target in just one hit. The next drone only hastened its demise. Next to the tank stood an abandoned APC, and of course, there's a free drone for it as well. Three drones ensured the end of two targets. But not all targets require so many drones. For example, this truck needed just one bird to strike it. Most likely, this vehicle was carrying some highly flammable materials, as within seconds its entire frame was engulfed in bright flames. This supply truck also was unlucky to stop in a dangerous spot, and it quickly paid the price. Its companion made the same mistake, stopping nearby. The driver didn't even have time to realize what had happened before the vehicle was already engulfed in flames. This incident is one of a kind. The Russians abandoned their APC in the middle of the road, sensing that its time was almost up. An FPV drone quickly approached the target and struck it. However, instead of causing an explosion of the ammunition, it triggered a chain reaction, causing the abandoned APC to fire a continuous burst from its machine gun into the air. This went on for several minutes until the ammunition was depleted. It's not every day you witness something like that.